The day Harlan Foss called Vivienne a diversity hire in front of 43 people, he did it with a smile. Wait, those names are from the list. Let me start clean. The day Raymond Dole called her a diversity placeholder in front of the entire board, he said it like he was doing her a favor. He even smiled when he said it. That particular kind of smile, thin, rehearsed, the one men like Raymond had been perfecting since prep school, the kind that lets them say something vicious while maintaining complete deniability. I was just being honest. Can't people take a joke? Meredith Langford did not flinch. She had spent 22 years in rooms exactly like this one. The long mahogany table, the leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that looked beautiful from up here and complicated from down there. She knew these rooms. She had earned her seat in them 3 times over, but Raymond Dole had never accepted that arithmetic. The meeting was supposed to be a quarterly review. Meredith was Chief Operating Officer of Vantage Capital Partners, one of the most respected mid-size investment firms in Atlanta. She had held that title for 6 years. Before that, she'd spent 8 years as Senior Director of Strategy. She had restructured 2 failing divisions, guided the firm through the 2020 market collapse without a single major client loss, and built a compliance framework that became something of a case study at Wharton. Raymond Dole was the firm's longest-tenured managing director. He had been there before Meredith, before the current CEO, before the remodel that turned the 12th floor from something out of 1987 into something that merely looked like 2015. He had survived every transition by being indispensable to whoever held power, and by being very, very good at making other people feel like guests in their own house. He had never warmed to Meredith. She'd known that from day one. There are some people who telegraph their feelings whether they mean to or not, and Raymond was one of them. He just thought he was better at hiding it than he was. For 6 years, she had managed the dynamic professionally. She was not there to be liked. She was there to do a job, and she did it. But that morning, Raymond Dole crossed a line he could not uncross. The meeting had started at 9. Standard stuff, portfolio performance, operational costs, staffing updates. Meredith had presented the Q3 numbers herself, including a 14% efficiency gain in the back-office operations she'd spent 18 months quietly rebuilding. The room had received it well. The CEO, Bernard Cho, nodded through most of it with the focused expression he used when something genuinely impressed him. Then Raymond spoke. He had a proposal, he said, a restructuring idea. Nothing formal yet, just a conversation he'd been wanting to have for some time. He cleared his throat, adjusted his cufflinks, real gold, always real gold with Raymond, and said that he thought the COO function might benefit from a strategic review. Meredith looked at him. "What kind of review?" she asked. "Well," he folded his hands. "There's a broader question about whether the operational and strategic functions should be separated. 2 distinct roles, more focused, more specialized. We had 2 distinct roles until 2019, Bernard said. We consolidated them because it was creating redundancy." Right. Raymond nodded like he knew that, like he'd factored it in. "But I think the landscape has changed. And I think—" He paused, and this was the moment Meredith would replay later in the quiet of her car. "I think we need to ask ourselves whether the current leadership structure fully reflects the complexity of where we're headed, whether we may have prioritized certain optics over certain qualifications." The room went still, not silent. Still, there's a difference. Silence is the absence of sound. Stillness is everyone in a room deciding at the same moment not to move. Bernard said. "Raymond." "I'm just raising the question," Raymond said, and there was that smile again. "We all know how Meredith came to this role. I'm not disputing her contributions. I'm simply saying that in a different environment, a different candidate might have been considered." Meredith set down her pen. She had told herself, years ago, that if this moment ever came, the moment someone said the quiet part out loud, she would not give them the satisfaction of her anger. Anger was what they were counting on. Anger let them reframe it. She was so emotional. She overreacted. She made it about race. So she did not give him her anger. She gave him something much worse. She gave him her full attention. Raymond, she said quietly, are you suggesting that I am not qualified for this role? I'm suggesting the process that led to your appointment. I asked you a specific question. Are you, in this room, in front of these colleagues, suggesting that I am not qualified to be chief operating officer of this firm? He shifted in his chair. I think the selection criteria at the time were influenced by, I have an MBA from the University of Chicago, a CFA, 22 years in this industry, the last 6 of which I have served as CO of this firm. In those 6 years, client retention has increased by 11 points, operational costs have decreased by 18%, and we have had 0 material compliance failures. 0. She let that word sit. So I'll ask you one more time, and I'd like a direct answer. Are you saying that I am not qualified? Raymond opened his mouth, closed it. Because if you are, Meredith continued, I'd very much like to know which of those qualifications you find insufficient, and I'd like the answer on the record. Someone at the far end of the table, she later learned it was Theo Gaines, the youngest analyst in the room, 26 years old, 3 months into his first real job, quietly exhaled. Raymond said nothing. The smile was gone. Bernard looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Meredith. Let's table the restructuring conversation for now, he said. I think we have more pressing agenda items. The meeting ended 40 minutes later. People gathered their folders and laptops, exchanged the usual pleasantries, filtered toward the door. Raymond was one of the first out. He did not look at Meredith as he passed. She stayed seated. She stayed seated because she had learned, over 22 years, that the moment right after something like that is when your body wants to betray you, the hands that tremble slightly, the jaw that wants to clench, the eyes that sting for reasons you refuse to name in a conference room in front of colleagues who are watching whether you are watching or not. She had learned to give herself 60 seconds. Just sit. Let the room empty. Let the moment pass through her rather than holding it in. Bernard was the last one left besides her. He sat back down. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, are you all right? I'm fine, she said. And she meant it, more or less. What he said. I know what he said. Bernard nodded slowly. He had been CEO for 4 years. He was careful, measured, occasionally frustratingly diplomatic. But he was not a dishonest man. That wasn't acceptable, he said. I want to be clear about that. I know it wasn't, she said. What are you going to do about it? He looked at her. I need to think about how to handle it appropriately. Bernard. She looked at him directly. I have worked here for 14 years. I have given this firm everything I had, in some years more than I probably should have. What happened in there was not a misunderstanding. It was not a communication failure. Raymond Dole told a room full of our colleagues that my position here is the result of affirmative optics, not qualification. He said it on purpose, and he said it because he has believed it for years and finally decided I wasn't going to do anything about it. She paused. He was wrong about that last part, Bernard said. What are you planning to do? That depends on what you do first, she said. I'd like to know where this firm stands. She picked up her folder, stood, and walked out. Meredith had not always been this steady. There was a version of her, the one who started at Vantage as a junior analyst at 32, later than most, because she'd spent her 20s building something else first, who would have gone home that night and cried and called her sister and questioned everything. And she did call her sister that night, to be honest. Her sister Paulette, who worked as a high school principal in Decatur and had no interest in the finance world, but an immense interest in Meredith's well-being and a gift for saying exactly the right thing. Did you embarrass him? Paulette asked. Yes, Meredith said. Good. What else do you need? Meredith laughed, which was what she'd needed. But the laugh faded by morning because the situation was still there. Raymond Dole had not quietly disappeared. He occupied a corner office on the 11th floor and held a title that carried weight and had, over 20-some years, cultivated loyalty in the people who reported to him. An incident like this, even if Bernard handled it correctly, had a way of spreading, reshaping the social atmosphere of a workplace in ways that were hard to document and impossible to dismiss. She had seen it before. She had seen colleagues recover and colleagues not recover, and the difference was rarely about who was right. It was about who had the institutional standing to weather the discomfort. Meredith was not afraid of discomfort, but she was clear-eyed about what she was dealing with. She did two things that week. First, she wrote a detailed account of what had happened, date, time, attendees, exact language used, context, and sent it to HR with a formal request that it be documented. Not as a complaint, she specified, as a record. She wanted it on file. Second, she called Walter Odom. No, that name is in the list too. She called her attorney. His name was Frederick Kane, and he had been her personal counsel for 9 years, since she'd first needed someone to review an employment contract and had ended up keeping him for everything else. Frederick was 61, semi-retired, and answered his phone on the second ring at 7 in the morning. "Tell me everything," he said. She did. When she finished, there was a brief silence. "How many people were in the room?" he asked. 43 on the calendar, 38 actually present. "And how many of them do you think heard it the way you heard it?" "Most of them." The stillness afterward was, there was no ambiguity. "Good," Frederick said. "That's actually good. You want witnesses, and you want witnesses who know what they witnessed." He paused. "What do you want to happen?" "I want Raymond Dole to be held accountable." "Define accountable." "I want the firm to acknowledge, formally and specifically, that what he said was discriminatory. Not a communication breakdown. Not a misunderstanding about tone. What he said was discriminatory, and I want the record to reflect that, and if they don't—" She was quiet for a moment. Outside her window, Atlanta was doing what Atlanta did in October. That particular golden blue that she'd loved since moving here 15 years ago, the sky so clear it almost looked sharp. "Then we have a different conversation," she said. Frederick said, "All right, let's give them a chance to do the right thing first." Bernard Cho called her 3 days later. He had spoken with HR, he said. He had reviewed the meeting notes. He had had a separate conversation with Raymond, which he described as direct and serious. He wanted Meredith to know that Raymond's remarks had been formally documented as inappropriate conduct, that he would be required to complete remedial training, and that the incident would be reflected in his performance review. Meredith listened to all of this. "Bernard," she said when he finished, "Raymond Dole told an entire boardroom that my position at this firm was the result of diversity optics. That's not a tone problem. That's not an interpersonal conflict. It's a discriminatory statement about my qualifications based on my race, made in front of witnesses, in a formal professional setting. Remedial training is what you require when someone sends an inappropriate email. What I'm describing is substantively different." "I understand." "I don't think you do," she said. Not loudly, not with heat, just with clarity. "What I'm telling you is that the response you're describing is not commensurate with what occurred, and I need to know. I need you to tell me directly whether this firm is going to treat it as what it actually was." There was a long pause. "Meredith, I want to handle this in a way that's fair to everyone." "Everyone," she repeated, "including the man who called me a diversity placeholder." Another pause. Longer. "I'll be in touch," he said. She hung up and called Frederick. The next 2 weeks were, professionally, some of the hardest she had experienced. Not because of any single incident, because of the atmosphere. This is what people don't talk about when they talk about workplace discrimination. Not the dramatic moments which are survivable, but the weather that follows. The colleagues who suddenly found it difficult to maintain eye contact, the meeting invitations that stopped including her. The way Raymond's direct reports, who had always been collegial enough, began routing around her in ways that could always be explained as process changes, reorganizations, adjustments for efficiency. Nothing you could point to, everything you could feel. She kept working. She kept showing up. She delivered a major client presentation that went exceptionally well and sent a gracious follow-up to everyone involved. She mentored the 2 junior analysts she'd taken on that year. She responded to every email, attended every meeting, produced every deliverable. She did not hide, she did not shrink, and she did not pretend. Because pretending, acting as if nothing had happened, absorbing the damage quietly, waiting for the organization's discomfort to blow over, was a form of collusion she was unwilling to offer. She had watched other people do it. She understood why. The pressure to be low maintenance, to not make things difficult, to be the kind of black professional who made white colleagues feel comfortable was real and persistent and ruthless. But Meredith Langford was 53 years old. She had been quietly absorbing discomfort for 2 decades, and she had decided some years ago that she was done purchasing her colleagues' comfort at her own expense. In the 3rd week, 2 things happened on the same day. First, Theo Gaines, the young analyst who had exhaled at the end of that meeting, knocked on her office door. He was nervous. He had a folder in his hand. He said he wasn't sure if this was the right thing to do, but he wanted her to know that he had documented what he witnessed, and that if the firm needed a statement from him, he was willing to provide one. She looked at him for a moment. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said, "but it was the right thing to do." He paused. "My mother worked in a hospital for 30 years. I know what this looks like." She thanked him. She meant it genuinely. The second thing that happened that day was that Raymond Dole submitted his resignation. She heard it from Bernard, who called her that afternoon, with the particular tone of someone delivering news they're not sure will be received as good. Raymond had decided, Bernard said, to pursue other opportunities. Effective at the end of the month. Meredith did not cheer. She did not celebrate. She sat with it for a moment. "Bernard," she said, "I appreciate you telling me directly, but I want to be clear about something. Raymond leaving doesn't close this for me. What happened in that room needs to be acknowledged by this firm, not just managed away. I don't need his absence. I need the firm's position on what he said." Bernard was quiet for a moment. Then, "You'll have it in writing by end of week." The letter came on a Friday. It was formal, precise, and careful, the work of attorneys, clearly, but within that careful language was something she had been waiting a long time to receive, an explicit acknowledgment, signed by Bernard Cho as CEO, that Raymond Dole's remarks in the September 17th board meeting constituted discriminatory conduct based on race, were contrary to the firm's stated values and legal obligations, and had been treated accordingly. The firm expressed its commitment to ensuring Meredith's continued tenure was supported without qualification or condition. She read it twice. Then she called Paulette. "They put it in writing," she said. There was a pause. Then Paulette laughed, a long, slow exhale of a laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep. Took them a minute. It did. "You doing okay?" She thought about that. She looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline, October doing that thing again with the light, turning everything gold at the edges. 22 years of this. 22 years of proving and reproving and documenting and insisting and being measured against a standard that moved every time she got close to it. 22 years of sitting in rooms where someone was always quietly taking inventory of whether she really belonged. "Yeah," she said. "I'm doing okay. Good, because I need you to help me move that bookcase next Saturday, and I can't do it alone." Meredith laughed. Theo Gaines went on to become one of the firm's strongest performers. She made sure of that, not by protecting him or giving him advantages he didn't earn, but by giving him the same thing she'd never had enough of early in her career: direct feedback, honest assessments, and the kind of advocacy in rooms he wasn't in yet that she'd had to build entirely on her own. She thought about that sometimes. The people who had come before her, the ones who had sat in these same rooms, absorbed these same moments and kept going anyway, in a time when there was even less recourse, even less language for it, even fewer Theo Gaineses willing to knock on the door. She thought about her father, who had worked 31 years as an engineer for a municipal utility in Columbus, Ohio, and who had been passed over for senior management 3 times in a row and simply kept doing his job with the kind of dignity that made his children feel, growing up, that the world was essentially fair. The world was not essentially fair, but it was possible, she had found, to insist on fairness anyway, not as something the world owed you automatically, but as something you demanded, specifically, on the record, with documentation, with counsel, in rooms full of witnesses. It was not glamorous work. No one applauded you for it in real time. You did it because the alternative was to quietly accept a version of yourself that other people had decided for you, and Meredith Langford had never been able to accept that. Some months later, she was asked to speak at a conference. A small thing, a professional development event for Black executives in financial services. They wanted her to talk about leadership. She stood at the front of the room and looked out at maybe 60 people and thought for a moment about what she actually wanted to say. She said, "Someone told a room full of my colleagues that I didn't earn my seat, and I sat there and I thought, I can be angry, or I can be clear. I chose clear. I documented everything. I asked direct questions. I demanded a direct answer. I did not accept a settlement that didn't include an acknowledgment. And I want you to know that choosing clear over angry is not the same as choosing quiet. I was never quiet. I was just strategic about what I spent my energy on." She paused. The seat was mine. It had always been mine. I just had to insist that the room acknowledge it out loud. Nobody in that room made a sound. Then someone started clapping, and then someone else, and then it was all of them. And Meredith stood at the front and let it wash over her and didn't try to be graceful about it. She had earned that too.